Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. I thought I had a great idea, but it didn't work. I was going to invite all the members and all the paid subscribers of the Substack to have a conversation with some of the previous speakers, recent speakers on forums. And so I advertised that and got my speakers together, and nobody else showed up. I don't know what went wrong, but I'll try again another time because I think it's a good idea. If you are a member or a subscriber on Substack, you can expect me to get back in touch with you. Anyway, Aaron Tovish was ready to talk about something else, and that's what we wound up doing. And so here we go.
I'd like to bring up another topic as well while we're here together, and that is it is the 100th anniversary of the germ and gas warfare protocols, to the Geneva Protocols. It's also the 50th anniversary of the entry into force of the Biological Weapons Convention. And maybe there's some value in reflecting on the role that the Geneva Protocol made in achieving those conventions, and what that might say about how we're approaching the achievement of a nuclear weapons convention.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that.
Uh-huh. Aaron, maybe you can tell us a little more about it.
Yeah, as you know, I've been putting a lot of effort into a network called No First Use Global, which is focused on the question of why do countries threaten to initiate nuclear war and what we can do to get them to stop doing that. And in the course of working on that, I've tried to understand how we got into a position where the issue of the use of weapons has been given secondary or tertiary or no attention whatsoever, decade after decade, and why we seem to be going around and around in circles on disarmament. And so I've looked back on the history of all this, and my conclusion is that we got snookered by history. If I may describe what I mean by that, it is that after World War One, and the soldiers went home, and people took stock of the horrors that had occurred in the trenches of World War One, with young people being killed or crippled for life by poison gases. They got to work on this in Geneva and adopted a protocol, mainly under French leadership, that no party to the protocol would use those weapons against any other party to the protocol. So it was a prohibition on use. It was not a prohibition on possession, in part because dealing with possession and verifying the lack of possession is quite difficult. And so the arsenals were basically put it back into the stockpile. And the remarkable thing is that throughout World War II, they were never brought out and used by the belligerents against each other. And after the war was over, people started to look again at the question of, can we actually get rid of these weapons? And the interesting thing is that if the possibility of nuclear weapons had been discovered 10 years earlier, it would have been on the agenda along with germ and gas weapons. It would have been considered a weapon of mass destruction. And one, I think, can say it's, of course, speculative with any sort of historical speculation that exactly how it would have turned out, but it's extremely logical and likely that it would have been grouped together with the other two as a weapon of mass destruction, and its use would have been prohibited, along with the other two. But the discovery of the nuclear power came at probably the worst possible time in history, shortly after Hitler had seized power in Germany. Swedish female scientists figured out what was going on with fission, and various scientists began looking at it more closely, including German scientists. So at any rate, as people know, Einstein wrote a letter to Roosevelt saying, we need to be on top of this because if the Germans get it first, could get ugly. The US rushed to get a weapon ready and managed to squeeze in 2 uses before Japan folded. I won't go into the details of the role that nuclear weapons played, just to say that it's been greatly exaggerated in bringing the war to the end. But when they first met in London in the first session of the UN General Assembly, they adopted a resolution that combined nuclear weapons with biological and chemical weapons and said these weapons should be eliminated. Now, there might have been an opportunity for them to also say, and in the meantime, these weapons must not be used. That was not said. And this is where we got snookered by history. The US was very proud of that they had created these nuclear weapons and that they had ended the war in the Pacific. And that, at that time, of course, the US were considered the saviors of the free world. And it was simply not polite, I guess, to say, by the way, the fact that you use these weapons was pretty fucking criminal. And don't ever do that again. But that didn't happen. And by the time NATO was founded, Russia had already achieved its own nuclear force, small as it was. And when the US extended its umbrella, so-called umbrella, to the other NATO countries, it was already in the form including first use of nuclear weapons. The idea was that a conventional attack on NATO by Russia's large land army would receive a massive nuclear retaliation.
Hold on, let me get see if I understand, because I don't know that period, I don't remember it. The first meeting, I know that there was a move to try to prevent nuclear or to ban nuclear weapons. Now, was this a resolution or was it, what happened? What exactly is this thing that
I'll provide some detail there. It was the first resolution ever adopted by the General Assembly.
Yeah.
Happened to be meeting in London at the time. It called for the creation of a consultation body between the military of the 5 permanent members to work on the disarmament of all weapons of mass destruction. But the distinction, and at that time, it seemed quite logical to focus on disarmament because you had the no-use agreements for chemical and biological weapons. So the next step was to deal with the possession. And at that time, only one country had nuclear weapons. And as far as people knew, it had only very few. They didn't know that the US was going full blast on producing more nuclear weapons. But at that time, the US probably had only about 20, if that many. So talking about disarmament at that point seemed to make a lot of sense, but it quickly slipped out of reach for various reasons, some having to do with the difficulty of verifying disarmament. And the question of non-use got lost. And by the time the NATO was founded, not only was the non-use issue lost, but the first use of nuclear weapons was embedded in the core of the NATO strategy. And it remained there. Now, at that time, having a first use option vis-a-vis a conventional invasion by the Soviet Union or the Warsaw Pact, which was created a little later, it at least made some sense to threaten nuclear response to a conventional attack, because Russia's nuclear forces were very small and weak at that time. And in the jargon of
this, I was assuming that this was before Russia had any, or that we knew they had any.
No, they tested in 1949. So we knew they had nuclear weapons starting in 1949.
And so this meeting that you're talking about, the resolution was when?
Russia what?
The resolution that we're talking about was what year?
NATO was founded in 1952 or 4, something like that.
We were still talking about the UN resolution, no?
No. I'm moving on from the UN resolution.
Okay, so
the UN resolution sat there, but things moved on. Russia developed its nuclear weapons. NATO was founded, and NATO had a massive retaliation policy versus a conventional attack. That made some, tactical sense in that Russia was not in a strong position to deal with a tactical or even a massive response from the U.S. So it was credible. But and this is the key thing, that by the 1970s, maybe even earlier, Russia had a nuclear force capable of responding to any kind of attack from the West using nuclear forces. At which point, the threat of first use lost credibility. And yet, by that time, it had become such a central part of NATO policy. Even to today, it's referred to as the glue that holds the alliance together. But it's totally delusional. Now fast forward to Putin moving into Ukraine, accompanied by his threat to resort to nuclear weapons if NATO decided to get too involved. Russia also does not have a credible first use option, because there are so many options of responding to that. So, but NATO could not call that bluff because they're engaged in the same bluff themselves. Now, in a way, it's reassuring that they're both bluffing. And I've been saying this from day one in the war in Ukraine. They're both bluffing. So in a way, you don't really have to worry about a limited nuclear war breaking out in Ukraine. However, it's not that simple, because Putin has gotten political mileage out of making these threats. It scares the public, and the government has to look as if it's dealing, responsibly with the fact that these threats are being made. But then, of course, nothing happens. And so the next time he makes a threat, he has to add on something, deploying weapons to Belarus, using an intermediate range missile to attack a city in Kiev, which normally would only be used for nuclear armed missiles. And all of these, and doing exercises involving nuclear forces. All of these things carry risks. And in the context of a war and a crisis, those risks are not minimal. There's possibility of accidental, unauthorized, inadvertent accident of use. And so the fact that they continue to promote this illusion of first use being a viable policy endangers us. And it's time to challenge that. And in doing that, we perhaps can create the kind of climate that help to get from the non-use of the Geneva Protocols to the conventions on biological and chemical weapons, like we want to get to a convention on nuclear weapons. So the proposal for no first use, which I prefer to say as in the form of renouncing the initiation of nuclear war, if we can get there, it's not just for moral reasons, it's for actual security and stability and basic credibility in international affairs, that we're not playing along with policies that haven't been relevant for almost half a century now. So I've said my spiel, but I think this is important because we have been hammering away for 75 years on the issue of disarmament. And we need to take an honest look at that. It has gotten us essentially nowhere. The dangers presented by nuclear war, the use of nuclear weapons, has not diminished significantly. The reductions that occurred at the end of the Cold War, while very large, did not actually make a dent in the impact that nuclear war, nuclear exchange would have on our beautiful planet. So I think we need to up the priority of the issue of use of nuclear weapons.
Okay, I think other people will have questions. I have one, but obviously it's the most obvious one. And I won't even ask it because somebody else should have the right to do so. Who wants to tackle Aaron? Yeah, Richard.
I agree with you, Aaron. I am sort of the optimistic. I think that, yes, I mean, we did go from over 70,000 down to the current 12, 13,000 now. South Africa gave up their nuclear weapons. Canada, I'm Canadian, and Greece sent their American nuclear weapons back. Kazakhstan and Ukraine sent their Russian, well, back in those days, Soviet nuclear weapons back. And we now also have the TPNW. The NPT, I thought, was reasonable, but unfortunately the language was that to the 5 permanent members of the Security Council and the ones that had also nuclear weapons, that they get rid of them in good faith. Unfortunately, that good faith has never occurred. And so they've not made any progress in getting rid of them. I do think that treaties, though, do work. They work. North Korea signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then when they wanted to develop nuclear weapons, they got out of the treaty. And we have just seen now both the Russians and the Americans have got out of treaties. And when countries don't like something, they announce that they are getting rid of or not going along with a treaty, and then they proceed to develop whatever. The other thing is that I think treaties, though, do work, even when people don't sign them. I think that the treaties that you've mentioned in terms of chemical weapons, biological weapons, to some extent, the Ottawa Treaty on landmines, even though that they have not been ratified by some of the countries, those countries have not used them. Unfortunately, it's never 100%. And of course, we do have landmines being used in a number of places. But I do think that treaties are useful, and that they do work even when countries don't sign them. They imply a moral condition so that, again, there was a number of American companies that were making landmines, stopped making landmines because of the Ottawa Treaty. So I think those are all optimistic points of view. In terms of nuclear weapons, they haven't been used for 80 years, and some say it's just good luck that they haven't been used. And the whole thing about deterrence is, to me, a failed concept, because to be deterred, you have to have a credible expression or a result of not doing it, and it must be done immediately. And nuclear weapons are suicide. So even if one side used them, the radiation and the nuclear winter would result in suicide. And as we then a couple of weeks or a week ago, when you had the electromagnetic bomb or pulse bomb, even just one bomb can render a country pretty well useless. So I think the nuclear weapons, to me, they're impractical. Even the tactical ones are too big, because if you have two opposing sides, they're too close together, and you put the nuclear bomb over on this side, it's going to affect your own people on the other side through radiation, which travels by the wind. And also it's too big because two armies are too close together. It's illogical that we should be spending money on something that we're not going to be able to use. It's insane, as I said, because they're in suicide. They're immoral, according to the Pope. They're inhumane because you're not only destroying civilians, but you're also destroying any means of helping them afterwards. All the hospitals, medical professions, analgesics, etc., would be all gone. They're illegal now because of the TPNW in the countries that have ratified it. And they're certainly indiscreet as well because they kill everything. So I'll just, I think for those reasons, I certainly agree with you that we need to have a no first use. But I think we really need to get rid of them completely, because even if you have a no first use, there's still the risk of miscalculations and accidents and terrorists. And Meta's favorite is the cyber terrorists taking over. So to me, the no first use, it's a small baby step. But what we need to do is get rid of nuclear weapons completely. Thank you.
I might have easily added to my comments that the goal of eliminating nuclear weapons doesn't go away. It's very much the key thing. However, if a country thinks it needs nuclear weapons in order to counter conventional warfare, it's not going to give them up, even if other side has given them up. So we have to address the issue of extending deterrence beyond retaliation in kind to retaliation against non-nuclear attack as well. So first use is not just a baby step. I would challenge that. I think it's an essential step. Without that step, nuclear disarmament simply will not occur. It'll get pushed down the road. And we have to address the fact that NATO is locked into first use policies. And NATO will not be a force for nuclear disarmament whatsoever. As you know, they're not taking part in the TPNW process whatsoever because they think that using nuclear weapons to counter conventional aggression or whatever is legitimate. We have to address that. And I think we can because I think the average person thinks we have nuclear weapons so that we won't get attacked by nuclear weapons. If the average person understood that our policy was actually to initiate nuclear war with all of the risks that involved, they would not be supportive of that. And we need to zero, and it's like the Achilles heel. We need to go right after that. And if we fail to go after that, we're basically giving up the game in terms of NATO, in terms of a lot of alliances that the US is in, and now Russia with Belarus.
My impression was, and correct me, that China has taken a no first use position. Is that correct? Has any other nuclear power done likewise?
Yes, India. India has a no first use policy, and China have no use. And in a way, that's quite an advantage for those who are arguing for it, because there's no objective way of saying that China's or India's policy has been less effective in bolstering their security or protecting them against nuclear attack than the policies that include first use. So it really needs, I think we're in a position where we can say, hey, look, you've had this policy since day one of NATO. The world has changed. The situation has changed. Other countries have seen the value of having no first use. I mean, one very important value of no first use is if you're in a crisis and the other guy thinks that you may go first, he's going to have an incentive to say, well, gee, maybe I should get in the first strike rather than be the victim of the first strike. If it's going to happen, well, then damn it, I'm not going to be the one to get caught with my pants down. And that's destabilizing. Am I still connected?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
my computer's acting up. In the India-Pakistan situation, Pakistan has a first use policy. India does not. But it is stabilizing that India does not, because Pakistan doesn't have to worry about India trying to preempt it. So it isn't in a position where it's in a sort of use them or lose them mentality. So even as a unilateral gesture, it simply makes sense in terms of security not to threaten to go first. But NATO does. And
Kathy and Mike want to chime in.
Yeah, I fully agree with nuclear disarmament and support any treaty that can lead to not having a first strike. But at the same time, when I look at the sites for our defense contractors, when I look at the sites for our military in the United States, there are two basic directives. One is give me a weapon with the greatest lethality. And the second is give me a weapon that can go the farthest. And apart from the nuclear weapons discussion, those are the basics. And when you talk about NATO, the US has bases in all these different countries, but it's the US that owns and operates them. So when you have a country like the United States that has more nuclear weapons than all the other nuclear weapons in the world, you've got a president that says, if I got them, I'm going to use them. That, apart from any treaty, and remember, the US does not sign very many treaties or agreements. We have a military that believes in exceptionalism. And if there's a military objective, they're going to go forth. And that pretty much runs the show. So I agree with going forth with treaties. I don't disagree with that at all, because we have to have, to me, it's aspirational, and we've got to work towards that effort every day we can. But at the same time, we have to look at what is going on with the other hand that is promoting not just nuclear weapons, and they don't use the word nuclear, they use the word lethality. And we heard it all through our political campaigns last year on both sides. Proud of the fact that we have a country that has weapons with great lethality, and we need to continue to do that. So I think we have to churn the needle in the country's leadership and and we have to make sure that we understand who's behind that as well, because we've got to get to the head of the snake. But those are just some comments I have. I live with these numbers every single day. And so while I also try to understand a lot of the political motivations for these treaties, I also see that the US has really not been a partner in any of this. So those are just my comments. And
You want to answer that, Aaron, or can I throw another one at you at the same time? Nowadays, what we hear is if Ukraine says, well, if we hadn't given up our nuclear weapons, Russia wouldn't have come in to attack us. And now Poland is saying, we want some nuclear weapons. Please come and put some weapons here. We'd like to have some. And nowadays in Canada, believe it or not, there is real discussion. I don't know how big, but it's a real one. Should Canada get nuclear weapons of our own? Because now we can't trust the US. So in other words, the deterrence of any kind of military attack by the very possession of nuclear weapons, I can't argue against that. They have a point. I think it's really true. I mean, and as somebody said, what was it? I'm sorry, not Morocco, but the other North, they gave up their nuclear ambitions, and then look what happened. They got attacked. Gaddafi, so I don't know that story, but I hear that is part of the same argument. Now, the question is, suppose Ukraine had kept, I don't think that's realistic, but had kept its nuclear weapons instead of giving them up at the, when the Soviet Union broke up. What would the impact be if they'd had a no first use position? I'm not sure what that would have meant in terms of the argument that has just been put forward. Look, if we'd kept ours, they wouldn't have done this to us. I'm not sure about the logic of it. Can you answer that, Aaron? And then Richard has put his hand up. And answer, I'm sorry, I butted in because Kathy, you need to handle Kathy's question first. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's important to address these questions, all of the questions that have been brought up. I'll start with Ukraine. Okay, first, Putin, we need to make a distinction between a nuclear weapon state versus another nuclear weapon state. There, I think first uses are not policies are not credible, because you use nuclear weapons, the other person will retaliate, and you'll have accomplished absolutely nothing except causing more destruction. So it's the threat isn't credible. Now, against a non-nuclear weapon state, for Russia to threaten Ukraine with nuclear attack is morally, of course, totally repugnant. Now, it's always been argued that that kind of activity would destroy the non-proliferation regime globally, because a country has agreed to not acquire nuclear weapons, but then it becomes a victim of nuclear attack, would completely undermine the entire logic of the NPT. Now, Russia may not give a damn about the NPT, but I think every nuclear weapon state very much cherishes the fact that they're part of a very exclusive community. And if they were to blow that up, it would have huge ramifications for them as well. So that's one reason why I don't think Russia would use nuclear weapons against a non-nuclear weapon state. There are also, of course, conventional responses that could be mustered against a use of nuclear weapons by a nuclear weapon state against a non-nuclear weapon state.
But let me go back, because what I said was not that I agree with you, maybe that Russia would not use a nuclear weapon against a non-nuclear weapon state, Ukraine. But Ukraine said if we had nuclear weapons, Russia wouldn't have attacked us at all.
Well, that's not necessarily true. And unfortunately, NATO is now looking at the possibility of Russia moving against the Baltic states. Now, that may be just a bunch of alarmism. On the other hand, those countries are vulnerable to conventional attack. Now, threatening to escalate to nuclear attack isn't credible, because Russia can respond. So when the task is not to continue to pretend that the nuclear umbrella deals with conventional threats, and start building up or continue to build up the capacity to respond conventionally to a conventional attack. So NATO has tied itself in a knot by taking on this these first use policies, and seeming to promise that they will come to the rescue of countries that come under conventional attack. I don't think it's not a credible promise. And unfortunately, though, like with bluffing, they do things that increase the risk. They deploy nuclear weapons forward. So you get into this lose it or use it scenario, where if weapons that are stationed in East Germany or Turkey or wherever were actually to be overrun by enemy forces, well, then what do? And it sounds, oh, well, then your hand is forced. You must use those nuclear weapons. Well, I would bet my bottom dollar that there are plans in place for rapidly evacuating those nuclear weapons from those places if need be. But I think the point is that the promise that nuclear weapons can address conventional threats is a false promise. And that
have any bearing on Kathy's points? I usurped my.
Yeah. Well, Kathy's point is very well taken, that there are a lot of people involved in the nuclear enterprise who don't give a hoot about whether, well, put it bluntly, whether any of this makes any sense or not. They've got vast investments in this. They've created a narrative around lethality, around the speed of attack, and so on, which it generates arms races. We thought it was over after after the Cold War, and here we are again in a situation where the arms races is occurring. I would say first use policies contribute to the arms racing policy, approach, because it increases the number of so-called scenarios within which various versions of nuclear weapons and their delivery systems have to be, absolutely must be developed in order to be able to counter this or that new threat. And this is the narrative that is dominating the public discussion of these days. And the issue of whether or not you should start a nuclear war has gotten buried. And I think it's our responsibility to say that that is the key question, not whether you have this or that weapon or how many of them you have. There's too many varieties already. It's already out of control. The question is, are you going to go starting a nuclear war or not? Now, Reagan and Gorbachev and lots of people since have reiterated a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. They went even further in the G20, which includes NATO countries and Russia and company. They went further in Bali and in New Delhi, where they said the use or the threat of use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible.
Hey, Richard.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aaron. And to answer your question, Meta, Ukraine had nuclear weapons on its soil, but did not have control over those nuclear weapons. So even if they were still being controlled by first the Soviets and now, of course, Russia. So whether they were on their soil or not, Ukraine could not have used them. So sending them back to Russia was really a moot point. If they had them, they couldn't use them. So that wouldn't deter Russia from attacking. Second, I remain optimistic in that within NATO, you've had several countries that are attending the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons as observers. So at least four countries have been doing that. Third point is we've seen the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, and we should have seen the dissolution of NATO as a result of that. Unfortunately, NATO has not resolved it, and of course now it keeps expanding its mandate, not from the North Atlantic, but it's now looking at Taiwan as well. So the mandate has certainly changed. I think that because NATO countries are looking at the TPNW as observers, there is hope. Excuse me.
Proceed.
In terms of a nuclear weapon country attacking a non-nuclear weapon country, there's been certainly a number of scenarios where that might have occurred. The U.S. thought about it in the Korean War. They thought about it in their Vietnam War. Britain thought about it with the war in Argentina, with the Falklands. So all of these are possibilities where a country with nuclear weapons did think of attacking a non-nuclear weapon country. So I think that risk is there. I
On the
think
other hand, in every case, they did not do it. And one needs to think about why they didn't do it.
correct. And I think, again, it goes back to that nuclear weapons are insane because they're suicidal. They're totally impractical as a defensive weapon. And that's an absurdity. They're not a defensive, they're an offensive weapon. But I mean, even a tactical nuclear weapon is way too big to be of any use. The only use of nuclear weapons is killing civilians in cities. They're not useful for going after military targets. Here in Canada, we've again just realized that the F-35s that we're purchasing are under the control, again, of Americans. So if the United States was to invade Canada, we could not defend ourselves with our F-35s that we've bought from the US because, again, they just turn them off by their own computers. So the whole thing is ludicrous from my point of view.
That obviously we're now into the wheel spinning. Kathy.
So, when I talked before about the military and its goal of having the greatest lethality and the farthest range for the new weaponry, a lot of those historical wars that we had, a lot of those are based on economics. And it's also based on wanting more oil. And I want to throw out a parallel to that discussion. What if, and I'm not saying it's in place for now, but what if you could develop a bomb with a sufficient amount of intensity in their EMP to knock out communication systems? You still have your buildings, you still have your people, but now you have a strategy that can then invade very easily another country. So all communications devices are down, and chaos gets created, and now you have the ability to move in. So there's a new generation. Times always change. There's a new generation of extraordinarily wealthy, powerful people. And they probably aren't looking at a nuclear war. They're looking at other ways of control. So I'm just talking to you in general terms, hypothetical, about recognizing that maybe nuclear weaponry is not on the table for some of the most powerful people in the world who pull the strings of a lot of the Putins and a lot of the Trumps. Maybe it's something entirely different. So curious to hear what you have about that.
If I may jump in quickly with an answer or a reaction there. You remember when Trump went to the UN and said, you know, North Korea, if you keep threatening us with nuclear weapons, you're going to get fire and fury, like blah, 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 blah. And then about 3 months later, he was suddenly writing love letters to Kim. And my speculation is that he was briefed on the potential that North Korea had for an EMP attack on the United States. People are saying, oh, North Korea, they don't have reentry vehicles. They don't have accuracy. You know, they're not really a threat to the United States. But someone said, well, you know, for EMP, you don't need reentry. The whole idea is to fire it off above the atmosphere. You don't need accuracy. You get it anywhere within several hundred kilometers of where you hope to optimize things. And you get 95% of the effect that you want to have. And I think Trump thought, well, gee, Trump Tower all of a sudden has no communications. The stock market is shot to hell. This isn't a good thing. And, you know, we have to take this seriously. I'm glad he did. I mean, at least he's taking something seriously. But yes, this reinforces the point I'm making that there is no percentage in starting nuclear warfare, because even a small nuclear power can cancel out any impact that you might hope to achieve by your first use of nuclear weapons. So the only thing that's left is retaliation in kind, or what Biden and Obama called sole purpose policy, which is essentially equivalent to no first use. I think that the peace movement needs to hold its nose for a period of time. And former Mayor Akiba of Hiroshima has talked about a 2035, 2045 vision, where you put your main emphasis on no first use to achieve near global agreement on no first use by 2035, and then you move decisively from there to the elimination of nuclear weapons in 1945, the anniversary of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I think we need to kind of hold our noses for the next 5-10 years and really focus on this question of who the hell thinks it makes any sense to start nuclear war, or even to threaten to start nuclear war. And if we can get beyond that, we're then in a much better position to say, well, then why do you have to have and spend all this money on nuclear weapons when you're not going to use them? So that's what I'm hoping to gather some folks together, maybe some of you, to start building up a network that can start asking these questions of the governments, of the experts, of the media. Try to get the media not to overreact to every stupid threat that Putin makes, but rather, say it's a stupid threat and it's not credible.
Let me go back to the basic question, which is, I have to say, Aaron, I think Putin really is crazy enough so that if he's about to lose the war, I don't know, there was a moment when it looked like he might, back the first year. If he's really about to lose the war, I think he would use at least one tactical nuclear weapon. I do. I think he would do it just to prove something or other, and maybe he would go full blast. Who knows? So I don't know what, given that I believe that, please dissuade me, convince me that that's not the case.
Yeah, I think it's also very possible with Kim Jong-un. I think he's fairly unstable as well. And so if he was dying of cancer or something and thought that he was going to go, he might try to take the world with him. And again, certainly Trump does have his moments when he makes inflammatory statements. And again, so one wonders about him ever carrying them out. Hopefully not.
I think both of these scenarios fall into the category of madness. Yes, that, like inadvertent use, like unauthorized use, like accidental use, that is a constant threat. I mean, the weapons are there, and if the chain of command is reliable enough, a decision could be made at some viable level, and it would lead to the use of nuclear weapons. That is a threat, and that is a constant threat. And it's not one that any policy can deal with as long as nuclear weapons are around. And it's part of the case for trying to achieve the elimination of nuclear weapons, no doubt about it. But I don't think that affects the case for getting the norm that has held for 80 years, no, not 80, yeah, 80 years now, into some sort of stronger legal form such that the threats stop. People stop making the threats. We can then start focusing on what it would take to establish a nuclear weapon-free world that is capable of remaining for a long time a nuclear weapon-free world. But as it is now, there's not the willingness or readiness to even begin to engage seriously in that discussion.
Well, that's what came of my great idea. And it was a good conversation, don't you think? Anyway, those of you who were expecting to join us for a group of conversation among members and new paid subscribers to Substack, you didn't get your chance or you didn't take the chance. But I'll give you another chance. We're going to do it again on the second Sunday of each month, I hope. And at least we're going to experiment, see how that goes. So I hope you show up, and we'll have another conversation involving discussion of recent issues and episodes that we produced, and anything else that's on your mind. This is a good time for you to bring your case forward for the particular issue that interests you the most. See you there. Bye.